So pumping and back to work is something that is, I'm going to be honest, just really overwhelming. Even having done it before, working in a very family-friendly place, it's not the most enjoyable thing. I'm Kelsey, founder of Compleo Kids, and this is Lauren Sam.
Hi.
She is IBCLC and also a pediatric dietitian. So like the most smartest qualified lactation consultant you can ever get. And she has Grow Baby Nutrition. So she's our lactation consultant at the clinic and then has tons of information on her Grow Baby Instagram. So today Lauren's going to talk about pumping with me. Thanks for being here.
Of course. So pumping when we go back to work can be a lot. It's already stressful leaving your baby and trying to get back into the swing of being around adults and fitting in your work life and all the things that you need to do at work. So a lot of times we get really nervous that we need to have a huge freezer stash before going back to work. And that's just really not true. When you go back to work that first day, you need enough milk for baby to have on Monday. And then on Monday, the milk that you pump is what you're going to feed on Tuesday. So I like to just tell moms whenever I'm working with them, like, you don't have to have a freezer stash. It makes us feel better, but you don't have to have one. And
that was such a relief, though, when you told me that I didn't feel like I had to spend my maternity leave also preparing for like weeks and weeks of baby eating.
And honestly, pumping too much early on can cause a lot of other problems. So it's really something that I discourage moms from doing. So really, before we get back to work, it's nice to have a couple of days, but you really just need that first day worth of milk whenever you go back. The other thing is, we want to try to have, we want to be trying to replace the milk that baby is drinking during the day. So I like to tell my moms, if baby's going to have 3 bottles while you're away from them, let's try to pump 3 times. In an ideal world, we space that out, but unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world when it comes to supporting breastfeeding. So our goal is to get, if we're giving 3 bottles, we want to pump 3 times. A lot of times I find that it's a little bit better if you're not able to space them out evenly to cluster them in the morning when the breast is more active anyways because of our milk making hormones, and space them out a little bit more in the afternoon.
What happens, and can it mess with your supply? So if you're someone who's lucky enough to not have big supply issues, so you might, if your baby kind of a lot of times only feeds on one side and then is full or doesn't fully empty, if you are able to pump those 3 bottles and say 2 pumps instead of 3 pumps, will it mess with your supply if, like, when you're at work, you're pumping twice, but when you're with your baby on the weekend, he's feeding 3 times in that same amount of time period?
That's a great question. And there's not one answer that's going to be the same for everyone. But what I think we can take comfort in is that babies are intelligent beings, but they cannot tell time. And so they don't know if it's been 3 hours since their last meal or 4 hours since their last meal. They don't know whether they took 2 ounces or 4 ounces. They just know, I'm hungry. I went to the breast. I ate. I'm no longer hungry. Time to move on. And so I think we can kind of take some comfort in that if we are making with a caveat, if we're making enough milk for our baby, maybe on the weekend they go and they get their 4 ounces and then they go 4 hours, like they don't know. They're not tied to that every 3 hour thing. So I think it's okay.
But don't make it a habit.
And we don't really know until we're there. And breastfeeding is oftentimes a supply and demand. So we need to ask for it in order for our body to keep making it. But if we're asking it and it's giving us what we need in order to meet baby's needs, and I think that there is okay for some wiggle room. But I think the best answer is, well, it depends. And let's get with an IBCLC who can help figure out your exact situation, and someone who can be keeping eyes on you so that if we do start seeing changes in supply, we can catch those quickly and not get ourselves in trouble in the long run.
What are some ways, like pumping back to work, back to life? There's my first baby, Scotty, he was a pandemic baby. So we were just always home. We weren't really traveling. Now we're already so much busier. And so I have like a 4-day continuing ed plan for August. So if you're replacing the next day, that's great. But if you're planning for like a longer trip and your goal, fed is best. So, we have formula backup, but if our goal is 100% breast milk the first year, what are some of the best ways to like add in an extra pump? When is the best way to do that without creating an oversupply, but also allowing me between now and August to slowly build up enough for me to leave for a couple days?
I love this question because I think the answer can be applied in lots of different aspects. And like what I like to call it is I like to call it extra credit milk. This is milk that we are storing, we're saving for another day. And the best time to collect that extra credit milk is going to be after one of baby's early morning feeds. So our milk making hormone prolactin is typically highest in overnight and in those early mornings. So the breast is most active, it's refilling faster. Early morning. So what I like to tell moms is let baby wake up at their, 5, 6, 7 o'clock feed. Hopefully later on.
We loved those late newborn mornings, and now we are waking up at 6 every morning.
So after one of those early morning feeds, let baby feed. They'll get everything that they need. You're more likely to have extra milk in your breast at that time. Then you turn around and you pump right after that feed. You get the extra milk that's there, and that's what you save for your rainy day. Or if you want to start early and you do want a little bit of extra milk in the fridge before you go to work, that's a great time to get it. If you're going away from a trip, that's a great time to get it. Another time that sometimes works once baby starts sleeping a little bit longer stretches overnight is, let's say baby goes down at 7 p.m., but you're not going to bed until 9. You don't expect the baby to wake up again and maybe till like 11 or 12. Doing a pump before you go to bed can be another way to get a little bit of extra in there.
Yeah, you had said that's what we've started doing, and that's been working well. What would you say in terms of like preparing? I think we had a completely unexpected situation. Our oldest ended up in the hospital in January for 24 hours. And luckily I had enough milk for my mom who stayed with our newborn who was 3 months old at that time. So like if you want just like a little bit for that like unexpected 24 hours to avoid an oversupply and the issues that come with that, when do you recommend starting one of those strategies?
The golden standard would be to wait until breastfeeding is established, which can look different for everybody. But maybe if I had to give a general answer, around 4 weeks.
Okay.
The other thing about that morning pump being extra credit is that you're not tied to doing it every single morning. You can do it here, you can do it there. Usually I find with just one extra pumping session per day, it's not going to significantly
create an oversupply.
Yeah.
Because that can be painful and come.
Yes.
I think so many people want to create the freezer stash. They don't really know the pain and clogged ducts that can come with oversupply.
Definitely.
Just from like a straight logistics perspective, returning to work is a lot, especially if you like work in business or a male dominated field. So just so everyone out there knows, what are you legally required to get and what should you advocate for from your workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you are legally required to have dedicated time, to a reasonable amount of time to pump, at least for the first year of baby's life. It needs to be in a location that is not a bathroom. It is not reasonable to think that a bathroom is a safe accommodation for a mom to pump. And it can be in addition to the breaks that you're already taking. So it doesn't have to be on your lunch break, although a lot of employers appreciate it if you do take it on your lunch break or your other paid breaks.
And I definitely want to encourage everyone to advocate for that. I've definitely met people who have a kid in the bathroom or have tried to get around it. And that is the law. That is like our right as moms. So please ask for that if breastfeeding the first year is a priority for you.
Yes.
In terms of like preparing for that, I know you think like a flange fitting is really important.
Yes.
What are some things to make sure you have all the things that you need that first day back at work when you start pumping?
Pumping is generally not recognized as a fun thing to do. Pumping whenever you're going back to work and you have all of the stressors of work is also not an easy thing to do. And so the worst thing that you can do is go back to work and be using the wrong flange size. The flange is going to be the tunnel where your nipple goes in and out of while you're pumping. The standard size that is sent is a 24 or 27 millimeter, and most moms need closer to a 17 millimeter. Using the wrong flange size can significantly impact your milk supply, and it can cause pain. And those are things that we don't want. So having the right flange size before going back to work or before doing any type of consistent pumping.
And how do they know they have the right flange size?
So you can meet with a lactation consultant who can size you. I'll use a little measurement tool, but then we'll also use different size flanges to actually watch how that nipple is moving in and out of the tunnel. So we look at what the nipple looks like, how the nipple feels, and then also what the milk output's like. And so that's really, really, really important to make sure you've nailed that down before you start pumping consistently. Otherwise, you want to make sure you have a really good pump. A lot of moms want to transition to a wearable pump as soon as possible, and wearable pumps are incredibly convenient, but they're not as reliable. And so I really like for my moms to know their normals, their normal flange size, what it feels like, how much milk they're normally making on a more reliable pump prior to switching over to a wearable pump, so that we can identify issues sooner without and be more likely to protect our milk supply in that situation.
What about, like, is it good though to go back and forth between like your Spectra and the wearable pump? Like, I know we were out of town this weekend without baby, which first night away, highly recommend if you have family you trust, giving yourself a full night of sleep once you hit that 4 or 5 month mark. But like I used the Spectra at the hotel, but like the wearable, like while we were actually driving. So I didn't give anyone a show who was like driving past us on the highway.
No. Best practice is always going to be to use a more reliable pump, but also in my opinion, it's better to pump with a wearable pump than not pump at all, right? So I think wearable is definitely something that can fit in, but we just want to make sure that we're doing it strategically.
Well, great. Do you have any other, I know something else that comes up with pumping a lot is, can you kind of go over any other, like, is it okay to keep the pump parts in the fridge while you're at work in between? And like how long, like what are the milk rules? Because if you're not breastfeeding on demand, we're dealing with like pulling milk from the freezer. So for how long milk is good, like after pumped and from the freezer and all of that.
So best practice is going to be to wash those pump parts in hot soapy water after every use. But once again, that's not always practical in the workplace. They do make wipes that you can use to wipe out your pump parts in between use. There is also the refrigerator hack where you're putting those pump parts, you're dumping your milk into whatever you're going to dump it into. And then you're putting all of those pumping parts into an airtight, clean container, such as a gallon Ziploc bag or maybe a Tupperware container. And then that's going into the refrigerator in between use. So it's a nice time-saving hack. There are pros and cons to it, but it is something that a lot of moms do, especially if baby is healthy and not immunocompromised for any reason.
And then what about like, so once you pump, like how long can you have the milk out? So sometimes I'll like, if I have something, I'll just pump right before I leave so my husband has the bottle. How long can it be out before it has to go to the fridge, and how long can it stay in the fridge before it has to go to the freezer?
Great. So one thing about that fridge hack, one of the reasons why we feel comfortable recommending it is that breast milk is good in the refrigerator for up to 4 days. So if we're taking those pump parts and we're putting them in the refrigerator, technically that breast milk, when we come to use it again, is still fine and safe. So that's one of the reasons why the fridge hack is considered to be an option. But in general, breast milk is good room temperature for 4 hours, in the refrigerator for 4 days, and in the freezer up to 12 months now. That's a kind of a recently updated recommendation.
And then once you pull it from the freezer, you only have 24 hours, right, though, after it thaws? After it thaws, you have 24 hours. But typically, if you take a bag of milk from the freezer and put it in the refrigerator, it's going to take about 24 hours to thaw in the refrigerator. And then you have 24 hours after that. So 48 to 24, kind of depending on how quickly the ice crystals melt.
And
I think the other thing that like my husband has asked before that, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I think it's good information for everyone to have. So once you pull it from the fridge and warm it up, you have about 2 hours to use it. And you can't like refrigerate it after you've warmed it up, right?
Correct. Yeah. Once it's been warmed, we want to use it within 4 hours. Once it's touched baby's mouth, we want to use it within 2 hours. But we really want to avoid warming and cooling, because when we do that, we can potentially give bacteria the chance to grow.
Yeah, nothing sadder. This happened to me. We had a full bottle that my husband didn't know the babysitter pulled out before she left and warmed up, and it was like filled to the brim, and then I came home and fed Ford and had no idea that was sitting out there, and we just had to toss it.
Yeah,
So
that's hard.
Also communicate on when you're pulling milk out. I think that's like a good tip with your partners and family members is like, let people know if you pull milk out, because we had no idea she had pulled it out. And then I texted Lauren, I was like, the baby's not hungry at all. Like, do I have to toss this? And she said yes. So
you can also use it for a bath though, or get it turned into breast milk soap and things like that. But it should not be fed to baby.
Yes, I know. There's nothing more painful than pouring away that liquid gold.
I know.
Any other tips you have for pumping moms, or whether they're working or just pumping so they can spend some time away from baby?
You are not measured by the ounces that you make. And also, if you're worried about your milk supply, it's a lot more effective and a lot cheaper in a lot of instances to just chat with a lactation consultant instead of buying this lactation cookie, that supplement, doing this pumping regimen that you saw on Pinterest or Instagram, but getting with a lactation consultant who can help you identify if you truly have a low supply, and if you do, why and how to fix it.
Yep. So if you are in the state of Texas, we work virtually also. So if you're in Central Texas, you can come see Lauren. If you're in the state of Texas, you can see her online. And if you're kind of outside of Texas, what should you look for in a lactation consultant?
That's a great question.
Know that you're working, because there's really good and maybe not as good advice out there. So to know you're getting quality information, what should you look for?
I think that this advice is true whether we're talking about lactation consultants, physical therapists, pediatricians. Like, the provider that you are seeing should make you feel confident that you can care for your baby. And if you leave that appointment with more questions than you came in with, or feeling like you were shamed, or that your answers your questions weren't answered, or that they were diminished, then it's time to find a new provider. And like I said, I think that's true no matter what kind of healthcare provider you're looking at.
And I think across the board, it's important for people to remember that, and for people to remember that you have a choice. So just because your doctor or your best friend said this is who you have to see, regardless if it's lactation, PT, specialist, you have a choice here in America to go to whichever provider you want. So if it doesn't feel right, try someone else. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for chatting. Comment below if you have any questions. If you find this information helpful, make sure to follow our YouTube channel, like, comment, and share for more content. And then head over to Instagram and get all your lactation help at Grow Baby.